Hi guys, and welcome to another Hero of the Week. This week's hero is Liz Webster, head of Save British Farming. Now, she appeared on NewsNight to explain the double-edged sword that exists for UK agriculture regarding the plan by the government to postpone post-Brexit checks for the fifth time. The original idea was a regime would begin in October, but this has now been pushed back to January. While on the surface this may help alleviate inflation, but as Liz points out here, the bigger problem is being outside the single market. Have a listen.
I know you've never really been a great fan of Brexit, have you? But you must welcome these delays.
Well, look, it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? There's no answer to this as it stands with Brexit. Yes, it's a relief for consumers because of inflation and the cost of living crisis, but it's an absolute catastrophe for British farming and British food and British food security. I mean, it's like expecting your football team, your British football team, to go and compete in international football with chains around their legs. We've got so much burden on us, no help. Food globally is under a lot of stress. We rely on Europe to feed us, even more now than
delays,
ever.
You welcome these delays, though?
I do welcome them, but I don't. And as I said, I don't welcome. It's both. I can't answer. I mean, what I would say, and what I would say to Nick, is the answer is to get back in the single market and free us up, because there are no advantages to Brexit whatsoever, particularly for food production and food security and public health.
Let's leave that.
I think that's a very valid point about public health that we don't hear a lot about when it comes to these checks. There's a real risk that something could arrive in the UK from the EU that could decimate UK farming, because checks are not being carried out, and checks once again are being postponed, which of course exposes the UK to certain risks. Now, it's important to remember that the response from many Brexiteers will, the EU doesn't have these problems. Yes, but not all goods arriving from the EU or through the EU are from the EU. What I mean by that is some goods are arriving from outside the European Union, passing through, and their final destination is in the UK. And EU countries are not carrying out checks on those goods because the destination is not the EU. So this is a risk as well. Liz also pointed out that there's no support. There was an interesting story a few weeks ago where UK farmers who were promised subsidies and funding that they had originally received as when the UK was a member of the European Union has not arrived. There were promises from Therese Coffey that money would arrive, and it hasn't arrived. And only a very small number of farmers have actually received support. So on the one hand, you have farmers not receiving support, you have no checks being carried out, and this is a massive risk to UK farming. And on the other hand, you have the EU carrying out checks. They have been doing that since 2021. This is what Liz is talking about, having chains around your legs when you're trying to play international football. The UK is seeing checks being carried out on its goods moving from the from the UK into the EU, but there are no checks carried out from the EU into the UK. Now, this, of course, is a double-edged sword because it protects the UK consumer from inflation, but it creates massive risks for UK farming. And as something like 40% of UK food is imported in winter, this means that there's the UK is exposed to a certain extent from ecological disasters in Europe. If there's as we saw when it came to tomatoes, I think it was either early this year or late last year, when there was a problem with tomatoes, the UK was at the end of the chain. So EU suppliers received their tomatoes from the producers, but the UK didn't, and there was a shortage. So this is once again a big problem, being outside the single market. But it's not just being outside the single market, it's also being outside the EU. If the UK was back in, the farmers would receive the subsidies and the support that they need, but they would also not have these chains around their legs. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think, and I'll see you next time for our next Hero of the Week.